Hello and welcome to an overview of VMware vSAN HCI Mesh. Let's get started. First off, how to set up VMware HCI Mesh. So within the interface, we're going to go to Configure at the cluster level and Data Store Sharing. From here, we're going to select which data store we're going to mount. In this case, we're going to mount a remote data store that's serving Oracle databases. Health checks are going to run. These health checks are going to verify that all the supportability requirements are being met in order to connect this cluster to a remote vSAN data store. The health checks will find potential compatibility issues. It will also review for things like networking performance, make sure that the clusters are at the right versions, and make sure that this is going to be a supported configuration. Going to notice that the interface will reflect that my production cluster here can now mount the remote Oracle vSAN data store cluster. So that cluster that I originally set up for Oracle databases can now be mounted for storage for regular virtual machines running in my production cluster. Mounts between the clusters with data store sharing. I'm going over to my SQL cluster, and I'm also going to mount an additional remote cluster here. I'm going to mount the Oracle cluster again. In this case, I obviously had a lot of compute demands on that cluster, but I'd kind of overbuilt the storage. I had some spare storage, and I wanted to be able to use it on the other clusters. And so in this case, we're able to leverage kind of that island. In the case of my SQL cluster has spare compute, my Oracle cluster has spare storage, and so by mounting that remote, we're going to be able to set that up. It is worth noting that you can set these mount in both directions, so two clusters can indeed mount each other. And this will make things like doing vMotions between them a lot easier. Your migrations at this point could be a compute-only migration. So in this case, I'm going back to the Oracle cluster I have, and I'm going to mount the production cluster. So now both those clusters will actually be mounting each other in this configuration. And we can see that the interface is now reflecting the fact that there are client clusters connected. So it is worth noting that we can unmount a cluster. We will have to make sure that there are no virtual machines remotely mounted and consuming the remote storage data store from here. But we can unmount that through the interface, and that will be reflected. So this is not a permanent linking between the clusters and the mesh. How do I migrate something? Obviously, I could create new virtual machines and place them, but what if I want to migrate an existing virtual machine that I have and place it, from the local vSAN data store to that remote? Well, this is actually a really easy action. This is fundamentally just a storage vMotion. So we'll go into the interface, and instead of having to change both compute resource and storage, we'll just use the change storage only. And then next up, we'll be brought up with a list of compatible vSAN data stores. Now, you can change the SPBM policy here. So you could maybe, if you selected something like a RAID 5 policy, that could be done. Note that obviously the data store that you're migrating to will have to support the policy that you want to put on. Once you're done with this, you hit finish, and you'll basically notice that there is a relocate virtual machine task running in the background. And so that is fundamentally just a storage vMotion going on. And once that's done, the storage will now be on the other cluster. Now, if you wanted to migrate the compute over there, you could do an additional vMotion after the fact. Thank you for watching the VMware vSAN HCI Mesh overview video. For more information, check out core.vmware.com.